Am I on? Okay, now we get to the second half. We're going to move into Muhammad and early Islam, the origins of Islam, and then we're going to move into the Quran itself. So this is the heavy material, but in some ways this is my favorite. I love this because it's the bread and butter of Islam. They have to defend this, and this is just not defendable. So let's go right into the problems with early Islam, provided my clicker will work. So while he's getting the PowerPoint up and running, the origins of Islam is a topic that's really been around possibly since 1970s, though a man named Goldziher started it back in 1920s. So it's nothing new to us, those of us who've been working in the Muslim field. It'll be new to you because you probably have never come across it before. But to start the origin of Islam, one of the big problems we've always had, concerns the problem of evidence. As you saw with the sources, nothing begins to be written down until the 9th and 10th century. When I did my first debate back in 1995 with Dr. Jamal Badawi, I gave 10 historical challenges on the origins of Islam taken from Dr. Patricia Corona there at Cambridge University. And his response was, Mr. Smith, so there's no evidence. But the absence of evidence does not automatically suggest the evidence of absence. The absence of evidence doesn't suggest the absence of evidence. The absence of evidence does not suggest the evidence of absence. Either way you do it, it works. And that's true. Just because there's no evidence doesn't mean that there won't be evidence or that they may not find it later on. You're just arguing from silence. An argument from silence is not a legitimate argument, he said. And it left me hanging. There should be evidence, as we said, there should be 200 years of evidence. There should be evidence almost immediately certainly of the person Muhammad, and certainly of the city Mecca, and certainly of the Quran itself, the book, the Quran. Nothing exists at all in the 7th century. There are no people called Muslims. There is no religion called Islam that we can find. There is no man named Muhammad there is a man named Muhammad. There are many men named Muhammad. It's a title. It's not even a name. It means the praised one in Arabic. So there are many men who could refer to themselves as the praised one. Muawiyah, the caliph, in 661 refers to himself as Muhammad. Umar, the king of Kufa, of Hira, which later became Kufa, he referred to himself as Muhammad, the praised one, whenever we went to battle. So it is a common title, not a name, but a common title in the 7th century. So that was our dilemma back in 1995. How was I going to solve that dilemma? Today, the problem has been solved. Because now we're coming up with all kinds of evidence. I'm going to introduce some of this evidence to you. And to begin with, probably the first bit of evidence is what you see up on the screen, the coins. See, coins are great. Why? Because they don't disintegrate, they don't deteriorate. They're as pristine today as the day they were minted. And because of the fact that they're made out of metal, they're either made out of gold, solidus, or copper coins, or what we know as silver coins. So in the West, they're always gold and copper. In the East, they're always silver. When I say West and East, I mean the western part and the eastern part of the Islamic Empire. So in what is today, well, let's just look at a map. Let's just look where the mints are. And these are where the mints are. And when you look, you would think that the mints are down here in Mecca, Medina, because that's where the coins are. And the great thing about coins is it is what every leader uses to announce that he's the new leader. So whenever there's a new king, whenever there's a new caliph, whenever there's a new emir, you don't have radio, you don't have television, you don't have newspapers to announce who you are. You use coins. You mint new coins. Once you mint the new coins, those are disseminated right across your empire. Everybody has to use coins to buy items, and so therefore they're going to have it in their hands. So you put your name on that coin. You put your image on that coin, and then you put your denomination, what religion you belong to. If you're a Christian, you put a cross. If you are a Zoroastrian, you put a fire altar. If you're a Muslim, you put a moon and star. But there were no Muslims. There is no moon and star on any of the coins. Can't find one. Not at all. But Christian coins are very easy to identify. So where were the mints? Well, the mints are up here in the west. Tartus, Hims, Baalbek, Demise, Tabaria, Abalia, Baisan, Jaras, Amman, Yubna, Ilya. Do you see where they are? Jordan, Israel, Lebanon today. What is Jordan, Israel, and parts of Syria today? All in the west, near the Mediterranean. Notice nothing down here where there should be. If this is the seat of the empire, if this is where the emperor is living, the caliph is living, if the caliph is living this far south, then the mints should be where he is, right? Here's what's ironic. All of the empires that we know, the Muslim empires from the 7th and 8th century, that is the Umayyad Empire, they were up here in Damascus. Damascus. They're way up in Syria. Why aren't they down here? The reason, do you know the answer? There's no water. It's as simple as that. Where there's no water, there's no food. Where there's no food, there are no people. No people, no place. No place, then there's no cities, no civilization, no history. So if there's no water, you can just throw this back at Muslims. The reason why nothing is happening down here is because, and it's all happening up here, because this is where the water is. This is where the Fertile Crescent is. This is where the trees are. This is where the vegetation is. That's where the cities are, and that's where the people are. Now, the other mints are over here in the east. In Susa, Dashk, Arajan, Bishapur, Tanbuk, Iskatar, Kazarun, Adarshar, Kura, and Kavad Kura. I know I'm desecrating those words. But those are all what is today Iran and Iraq. That is the Persian mints. That is the Zoroastrian mints. The Sassanid mints, the Sassanian mints, the Sassanid Empire. That's where all their mints are. Nothing down here. Yet this is, according to Islamic tradition, this is where all this area was controlled. So, all of these mints would have been under the authority of any Arab leader or caliph in the 7th century, including any Muslim caliph. So why are all their mints so far north? None of these mints were in the Hijaz. Hijaz is that central area right there where Mecca and Medina are. Instead, they were all situated too far north. Well, let's look at the coins themselves. Using a timeline tells us a story. Let's now look at the story from the 7th century, the Numismatics. The Numismatics are the people who follow coins. I came across this material back about 2 years ago. I was in London 2.5 years ago. I was traveling from Ethiopia. I stopped off in London to get on the ladder with Hatun. She said, Jay, we need to go to the British Museum. There's a problem there. They put up a new gallery on Islam. I want you to look at the coins. There's a coin there that doesn't make any sense. So I went with her and I looked at the coin. It was a coin by Mu'awiyah, who came to power in 661. And it had La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, which is the Shahada. I said, hold on a minute. How could they be talking about Muhammad as the messenger of God in 661? Because this was something that was introduced in 692. That's 30 years too early. And so I went back to the States. I said, I'll look into it. I went and I started scrounging around all the newest materials that I could find. I started looking at their articles, and I noticed that no numismatist had put this coin that early, 30 years early. They all put that coin with al-Malik in 692, not in 661 with Mu'awiyah. So I started putting it up on YouTube. YouTube is a great place because once you put it up on YouTube, people are going to watch it. Once you get watched, you get peer reviewed almost immediately. It takes seconds to get peer reviewed. If I were to write an article about this, it would take months, sometimes years, for people to respond to me. But on YouTube, seconds. That's why all over the world, suddenly I started getting these comments in the comment box. You are right, Mr. Smith. I'm a numismatist. My name is Odin Lafontaine. I am from Paris. I am French. We have been working with coins for almost 50 years. I've been working personally with coins for 25 years. This is my area of expertise. We have had a problem with these coins that you're looking at. We have always had a problem because we could not put the standard Islamic narrative onto coins. It made no sense. So I wrote back to him. He spoke perfect English. I said, Odin, great to meet you. I want you to now tell me what is on the coin. Stop imposing the narrative on the coin. You tell me what the coin says. Just read the coin. You're the numismatist. Tell me what it says. What is the Arabic there? You can read it. Look at these coins. So let's look at some of the coins. Muhammad, first of all, in 632, he dies. But there are no Islamic coins at all bearing his name. If he is the caliph at that time, from 624 to 632, he is the caliph for that 8-year period. He must have put coins out somewhere. Where are his coins? None. Well, then you get to 651. So now you have Abu Bakr, you have Umar, Uthman, and Ali. They're all down in Medina. They are now in charge of Tripoli, all the way from Tripoli to Afghanistan. They control all of the empire. They control all of the coins. Where are their coins? They don't exist. But coins do exist. Coins are being minted in those mints that I just showed you. They're still minting coins. They're in Arabic. And guess what they show us? Here they are. They all have crosses on them. They have pictures of the different leaders, all from that whole area. But every one of them has a cross. See, there's a cross there. See, there's a cross there. See, there's a cross there. Look at, there's a cross there. And on the top of the M, which is the denomination of that coin, there's a cross. These are all Christian coins. 620, 630, 640. So all the coins are Christian. None of them are Muslim. Yet this is the beginning of the Islamic Empire. This is when Muhammad, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali were living and reigning and supposedly making coins. But we can't find any reference to these names. No inscriptions, nothing can we find their names on. So then we get to Muawiyah. Muawiyah is well known, very historical. Everybody knows about Muawiyah because he's the one that at the Battle of Siffin, he creates the first Islamic empire. The first historically supported empire that we can find is Muawiyah. Now, Muslims will tell you Muawiyah was a Muslim. This is what everybody has been told. Look and see where his headquarters are. He's up in Damascus. If he was a Muslim, what's he doing in Damascus? Why is he not in Medina, where Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali were? Where Muhammad was as well. What's he doing way up in Damascus? But look at his coins. The coins tell you the story. And when you look at the coins, take a look. There he is. There's his image. And what's above his head? What is there above the head? Can you see? There he is again. What are those? Those are crosses. He is a Christian. From 660 all the way to 680, all of his coins are Christian in the western side. What's interesting, I want to show you this one here. Then these coins start to appear during his reign over in the eastern side, and they have the Zoroastrian fire altar. So he's giving homage to the Zoroastrians. He himself is not a Zoroastrian. He is a Christian. I want to show you one other. During his time, he then puts up this. He then creates this inscription. This is an inscription at the dam in Taif. And take a look what you see right up there. There's a cross. It begins with a cross. What Muslim would have a cross on his inscription? And then you see where it says this is a Christian cross, refers to Muawiyah as the Abdallah. Abdallah means Abdallah means slave of God. Everybody used the name Allah. The Jews named Allah because it's the Arabic name for God. Just like in English, G-O-D is the English name for God. And everybody uses G-O-D. The Muslims use it, the Christians use it, the Jews use it, the Hindus use it. Anytime you say God, it's G-O-D. It's generic. And that's the Arabic name. So Abdullah means slave of God. Direct transliteration into the Greek alphabet. So he's using Greek there. Why would he be using Greek if he was a Muslim? He would be using Arabic. But he has an expression, Abdallah, Amir al-Mu'min, means servant of God, the commander of the believers. He is a servant of God. He is a slave of God. He is the commander of amongst the believers. What believers? Christians. These were all Christians. All of them were Christians. So, put up his coins. And then we get al-Malik. Now, al-Malik comes to power in 685. He is an anti-Trinitarian. He is still a Christian. He claims to be a Christian. But he does not like the Trinity. He does not like the divinity of Jesus Christ. So he is purely anti-Trinitarian, which means he's against the Byzantines. And he introduces this coin. Now, this coin over here is the Byzantine coin of Heraclius with his two sons on either side. What are they holding in their hands? A cross. What is above their head? A cross. Here is the Byzantine cross. You can see the cross piece there, okay? Up there and there. That's the Byzantine cross, well known on all the Byzantine coin. He then introduces this coin in 692. It's a mockery of Heraclius and his two sons. He's taken the cross off. See, the cross is no longer there. The cross is no longer there. On the back side, he's taken off the cross piece. It's a mockery of the cross. So it's a mockery of Byzantine Christianity. And what does he do here? He introduces the Shahada. There's the Shahada. La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. There is only one God but God. He's anti-Trinitarian. And the messenger of God is... And the praised one, which is Muhammad, the praised one is nothing more than the messenger of God. That's what's on the coins. That's the first time we see the Shahada. He also introduces this on the Dome of the Rock. When you get to the Dome of the Rock, and this is what I love, when you get to the Dome of the Rock, you will see the inscriptions around the ambulatory, the only original part of the building that's still there today. The building has been destroyed and rebuilt 11 times. The only original part are those ambulatories. And there are inscriptions all the way around it. When you look at the inscriptions, they say not three, for God is one and he has no son. That comes from chapter 4, verse 171 in the Quran. After that comes, for God does not beget, nor is he begotten. That's in chapter 112. Who is that attacking? Say not three, that's attacking the Trinity. God has no son, and Jesus is not the Son of God. That's attacking Jesus. It's attacking the Trinity and is attacking his sonship. God does not beget, nor is he begotten. That's attacking John 3:16. It's all against Jesus. Then you have the Shahada that follows. La ilaha illallah. For God there's only one God but God, and the Blessed One, referring to Jesus, is nothing more than the messenger. He is not God. He is not part of the Trinity. He is not the Son of God. He is nothing more than a messenger. This is an attack against Jesus. It's attack against his divinity. It's attack against the Trinity. And look and see where he puts it. He puts it on the Dome of the Rock. He erects it right there in Jerusalem. He lives in Damascus. Why does he erect it in Damascus? Because it's right on the Temple Mount. It's still there today. Go to Jerusalem. You can see it with that beautiful gold dome on it. When he erected it, it did not have a gold dome. But those inscriptions were attacking Byzantine Christianity. Why? Because the Church of the Sepulchre is in Jerusalem. It sits below it. It looks down onto it. This is a one-upmanship saying that we are the new men in town. And our God, Jesus, he is the Messiah, but he is not the Son of God. And you put it right there where the Jews have their Temple Mount, because that is where Jesus is going to return again. Can you see? This is political, this is theological, and it's there staring us in the face. The third most holy shrine in Islam, all about all against the divinity of Jesus. Islam was begun as an attack against Jesus' divinity. Now, it's still not Islam yet. It has not become Islam yet, because al-Malik is still a Christian. He's not a Trinitarian Christian. He's an anti-Trinitarian. So he puts it on that. Immediately, Justinian II, who is emperor by this time at Byzantine, he is the Byzantine emperor. He gets angered by what al-Malik does, goes to war against al-Malik and loses. al-Malik wins the war and immediately introduces this coin right here. That's a picture of al-Malik with a sword. This means he's going to war. Since when can Muslims put up pictures of themselves? It's anathema. You can't have any image, right? So what's he doing? If he was a Muslim, why would he putting an image up? He is not a Muslim, folks. This is not a problem for him. He is still a Christian. But he puts this sword up because he is an anti-Trinitarian, basically going to war against Justinian, the Trinitarian, and he wins. Once he wins, he puts a mockery of the Byzantine cross and puts the Shahada to show that Jesus is nothing more than a messenger of God. That's in 693, a year later. And then in 696, this is the first Islamic coin. Now, it's still not Islamic, but it's the coin that shows you exactly what's going on. There you can see the Shahada. On the back side is the reference to, there's only the chapter 4, verse 171. Say not three, for God is one. And then around the side is attacking the begetting of God. How can God be forgetting? So, that is begotten. There you see an attack against Jesus Christ. It's all on the coin. Just follow the coins. Now, who has the evidence? Do the Muslims have evidence, or do we have the evidence? That's the beauty of coins. But don't just stop at the coins. Take a look. Earlier coins show a Christian identity on both sides of the coins in the West and Zoroastrian in the East. 624 to 660, early Islamic coins just don't exist. Why? Since they controlled so much of the land and mints in Syria and Iran. From 640 to 660, some of the Arab proxy states seem to be Christian, and others seem to want no religious symbol. Then when Muawiyah comes to power, he is definitely a Christian. And he puts Zoroastrian coins on the East, but his coins are all on the West with his name on it. And he adds Allah's name, but not Muhammad's. al-Malik and Zubair, we won't get into that because that's another intermediary coin. It's when you get to 693, Justinian attacks al-Malik, who adds his image with the Shahada, either to confront or claim messiahship. And then finally in 696, the Arab script Shahada with no associates attacks Jesus' divinity, John 3:16, and Islamic superiority. While Allah's name is introduced early in Nabatean, Muhammad's is not. He's uniquely Islamic. Doesn't the numismatic evidence support the archaeological and documentary evidence? Does this not suggest, therefore, that Islam was not introduced by Muhammad but possibly, and I'm saying possibly, by al-Malik? These 7th century coins confront the traditional 9th to 10th century Islamic narrative. This shuts down the standard Islamic narrative just by following the coins. What about the inscriptions? The inscriptions are like the coins. They cannot be destroyed. They are pristine. They are perfect to look at because they're almost as good today as the day they were chiseled. Now, these are prayers by pilgrims on their way to do the Hajj. Many of them are on their way to Jerusalem or they're on their way to Petra. They're not to Mecca yet because these are all too early to go to Mecca. But you can read them. They're all in Arabic and they're still there today. Note where the 7th century inscriptions are found. They're all found either up here in Jordan or they're found down here in the Yemen. None of these ones here are 8th and 9th century. The 7th century are up north and south. Why are they not found in the middle part where they should be? Anybody know the answer? There's no water. That's all you need to say. There's no water. And that shuts down that argument. The reason why, there's no people there. If there's no people, there's no inscription. If there's no inscription, then why are you looking for it there? You've got to go where the people live. The people live where the water is. So now let's look at what Ilka Lindstedt. Dr. Ilka Lindstedt is the first one to actually look at the inscriptions and come up with all kinds of conclusions. He looks at the first 100, he wants to look at a 100-year period from 640 to 642. So this is, if Muhammad had been living, he's looking right after Muhammad died, going through the Umayyad period, right up to beginning before the Abbasid period comes to power, which is the most important period. And he looks at all these inscriptions. He's the first to do so and read them and come to conclusions on them. And this is what he noticed. He knows that prior to 690, there were no evidence of anything Islamic on the inscriptions. All they had was what we call formula. Everything that comes after 690 would be Islamic. So nothing prior to 690 could be even conceivably be Islamic. Remember, if Muhammad lived, he would have died in 632. So we're talking for 60 years after Muhammad, we see nothing Islamic at all. And although there's all kinds of reference, religious reference, it's not about Muhammad. From 690 to 710 on the inscriptions, the Prophet Muhammad begins to appear. So he begins to appear basically at the end of the 7th century, the beginning of the 8th century, just after al-Malik. From 710 to 720, the Muslim rites begin to appear, such as the pilgrimage, the prayer, and the fast. And then from 720 to 730, the names Muslim. Finally, you hear the people called Muslims. And the name Islam, the religion called Islam, which refers to a specific group which is in contradistinction to Christianity, another group that are not Christians, who are in contradistinction to Christianity. Now, the problem with this is it was only in the 730s onwards that there is evidence of popular devotion to Muhammad as a prophet and a messenger, which makes the Islamic traditions incredibly awkward because it goes right against everything we know about Islam. What's more, there's a 100-year silence prior to this that indicates that Islam did not exist as a distinct religion until long after the time of Muhammad, which casts doubt on whether he had any part in starting it. Conclusions concerning early Islam: there are no coins anywhere in Central Arabia, and the Arabic coins which do exist are all further north and are all Christian, up to and including the reign of Muawiyah to up to 680 AD. It is only the coins that are being introduced by al-Malik that we begin to possibly find Islamic coins, though they could still be referencing Jesus or even the Caliph, though they are anti-Trinitarian. The rock inscriptions are similar to the coins, with nothing Islamic prior to 690, and then references to Muhammad from 690 to 710. Muslim rites begin to appear, and the pilgrimage, and the prayer, and the fast from 710 to 720. And then finally, the names Muslim in Islam reference a group which is not Christian from 720 to 730. This suggests that there was an internecine clash between different sects within Christianity, both Trinitarian and anti-Trinitarian, which start to become its own religion at the end of the Umayyad dynasty, which then became the Islam of today during the initial 100, 200 years of the Abbasid dynasty. Basically, Islam as we know it only began with the Abbasids. Look at the coins, look at the inscriptions, just follow what they're saying, and stop imposing your narrative onto them. Since that time, we're suddenly getting all the numismatics. We're getting a huge number of numismatics. These are experts in coin who are coming our direction. They're saying, finally, we now understand the coins. But folks, can you see the problem? If you have a narrative and it's the only narrative you know, and you have the evidence in front of you, you try to impose that narrative onto the evidence, and it just makes no sense. Take the narrative away and start from scratch is what I say. And I say this to the numismatists, I say this to the inscriptionists, I say this to all those who are looking at the manuscript as well. You need to follow what's on the ground and then tell us what's happening. So let's follow on the ground and let's go to the Quran. Now, this is the most heavy material. This is I find the best material for you guys and gals to use. Why? Because it is the biggest problem for Muslims. This is the headache they don't know, they cannot get away from. Here's the problem. Every Muslim makes 4 claims about the Quran. Whether they are radical, whether they are nominal, maybe not the liberals, but certainly the radicals and the nominals make these 4 claims. Number 1, that the Quran is uncreated. That means it has always existed eternally on these eternal tablets that exist in heaven. Number 2, that it was sent down to a man named Muhammad between that 22-year period between 610 and 632. So that 22-year period. Number 3, that it was completed not by Muhammad himself, but completely written down by Uthman in 652, 20 years after Muhammad's death. And then number 4, that the Quran has not changed in the last 1400 years. Not one word, not one letter. It has not changed. Those are the 4 claims. Have you heard any other claims besides that? No, that's it. Now, they may make some other subsidiary claims, but those are the 4 foundational claims about their Quran. What's my remit today? Well, I'm not going to confront the first 2. How can you confront eternality and how can you confront 7th century material? I'm not in the 7th century. But I can confront the second 2. The idea that it was complete at the time of Uthman, and number 2, that it has not changed. Those 2 I can confront, and that's what I'm going to confront. So preservation, I'm going to confront. So what I'm looking for is one manuscript of the Quran from the 7th century, that's mid-7th century, 652, the time of Uthman, that is 114 surahs, and exactly like this Quran that I have in my hand today. This is the Uthmanic recension according to what the Muslims tell me. So I want to find a manuscript or any type of fragments that can trace back to the 7th century that are just like this book, okay? In Arabic, not the English translation, obviously. So unchanged. So let's look at a 7th century Quran. So this is their narrative. This is not my narrative. Note which cities and which countries the earliest Qurans came from according to the Islamic traditions. Muhammad dies in 632. The Quran is not written down when he dies. Right after he dies, there is a battle up in Yamama. And many of those who had memorized the Quran, 70 of them die in the battle. Because of that, that caused the crisis. So Abu Bakr, who's the caliph at that time, quickly calls up the secretary of Muhammad, Zayd ibn Thabit, and says, write the Quran down so that we don't lose it. He says, well, how can I do something the prophets didn't do? He says, nonetheless, do so. Write it down. So he finally agreed to do so, and he wrote it down, he went to different men who had still survived, who had died at the Battle of Yamama, took it from their memories, got it from bones, got it from stones, got it from pieces of bark, and he wrote the Quran down. That's in 652. Handed it to Abu Bakr, he handed it to Hafsa, who used to be the wife of Muhammad, who is the daughter of Umar, and she puts it under her bed. Now, why would you put a book under your bed, which is the only revelation of its kind? It's the greatest revelation. It's the final revelation. Why would you stick it under your bed? Graham, would you do that? Absolutely not. You'd make copies of it right away, right? They didn't make one copy. Just one copy was made, put under the bed of Hafsa, and she kept it there for 20 years. Now, according to Abu al-Bukhari, let's jump 20 years. 20 years later then, Uthman is in power. So we're talking about 652. He's the 3rd caliph. He's now in power. He has a dilemma. His men go up to Azerbaijan to have another battle. And at that battle, when that happens, after the battle, they go to a mosque to pray. They're there with the Iraqis. They're there with the Syrians from Damascus. And as they're praying, those from Medina hear the Iraqis and the Assyrians praying different references, a completely different verse, not the same verses that they're praying. And they start fighting each other, coming to blows, bam, 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 bam. He comes biddling down. Udaifa comes running back down to Medina, talks to Uthman, and says, we have got to make one Quran, one standard Quran, so we don't have many Qurans like the Christians have many Bibles. We must have just one Quran. So they go and wake up Zayd ibn Thabit, who's fast asleep after 20 years, and they say, rewrite the Quran that you gave to Hafsa, get her Quran, and rewrite it again. And this time, write it in the Qurayshi dialect, which means you have to have a different dots and different vowels. The problem is there are no dots and vowels in the Qurans that early. None exist, because Arabic was not that sophisticated. Arabic is a brand new language. It didn't even have its own script. It had borrowed its script from Syro-Aramaic, which is used up in the north, but it did not have that script. Remember I showed you that map of the red rectangle and the green rectangle? It was borrowing from the Sabaeans way down in the south. It then had to use the Nabatean Aramaic, which is way up in the north. But all the Nabateans had were 16 letters. Today, if you look at Arabic, it has 28 letters. So what happened? Well, obviously, more letters were added. I'll talk about that in just a bit. So here he comes and he has Zayd ibn Thabit write it, the second Quran. This is a second recension. So now you have a second Quran written 20 years later, different than the first Quran. That's the first problem, right? What does he do then? He takes all the other Qurans that disagreed from those up in Syria and Iraq, and he burns them. Jonathan, why do you burn Qurans? Get rid of the evidence, right? You don't want anybody to see. These are corrupted Qurans. So isn't that an admission that there's more than one Quran? Bingo. Can you see the problem the Muslims have? They don't know how to answer this when I ask that question. Why would Uthman burn Qurans unless there were more than one Quran? So what does he do? He then takes the one Quran and makes 5 copies, and he sends it to those cities. Up here is Medina, this is Mecca, there's Basra, there's Kufa, and there's Damascus. So 5 cities, 2 in Saudi Arabia, 2 in Iraq, and 1 in Syria. 5 copies, so that no longer ever again would there be another Quran that disagreed. Now this is standardizing the text. That's pretty smart. Should have been done at the time of Abu Bakr. So this is 652. Now I'm still telling you their narrative. I'm not making this up. This is what every Muslim knows, what I'm telling you right now. However, there was a problem. Because though he put those 5 Qurans in those 5 cities, we can't find one of them today. Ask any Muslim, where are these Uthmanic recensions? Where are these Uthman texts, codices? Not one exists anywhere. That's rather inept, isn't it, of the Muslims? They've lost all 5 of them. Go ahead.
When did Uthman die?
Did who?
Uthman, when did he die?
He died in 656. This is all happening in 652. Does that help?
Yeah, the thing that really caught, the takeaway thing for me in the first part of the lecture was, those companions.
Yeah.
When they're there, so they're 200, 150 years later and all the rest of it. So, do the Muslims hold that they wrote the Quran, these people?
They wrote, not the Quran, they wrote the traditions. The Sirah, the Tafsir, the Tahqiq, and the Hadith. That's a whole different genre, much, much later. Now we're in the Quran, which is written much earlier. But look what the problem is. It was written in 652, not 833 or 870 or 923, which is when the traditions were written. This is written in 652. So this is just 20 years after Muhammad's death. They said it was written. However, you got a problem. Because by the end of the 7th century, suddenly new Qurans start to appear. You have Ubay ibn Ka'b, who introduces a new Quran up in Damascus. And his Quran has 116 surahs. The present-day Quran only has 114. 2 extra surahs. So it cannot be the same Quran, right? Ibn Masud, up here in Baghdad, introduces a brand new Quran, and his only has 111 surahs. There's supposed to be 114. His has 3 less than what we have today. And then you have Ibn Musa over here. His Quran is 114, but it has so many differences that we don't even talk about it anymore. So you have 3 different Qurans up in the north, in Iraq and in Damascus, which are not the same as the Quran we have today. Where are those Qurans? Dr. Arthur Jeffrey, an Australian researcher, did a doctoral thesis back in 1935, so almost 100 years ago, where he looked at just what the traditions say about these 3 codices in comparison to Ubay ibn Ka'b, Zayd ibn Thabit, the one that was made in Medina. And he found 15,000 differences recorded. 15,000 differences. So we're talking about completely different Qurans in the 7th century. There were at least 5 Qurans in the 7th century from Mecca, Medina, Basra, Kufa, and Damascus. Do we have even one of them today? We don't even have one. There are no 7th century Qurans. If Allah is able to preserve His Quran perfectly, as it says in chapter 15, verse 9, then there should be at least 5 complete Qurans in existence in the Muslim world. So where are they? Well, let's look and see where they are. If you want to find out where the Qurans are, you need to go and see where they're located. This is the Topkapi Quran. This is the best of one they have. This is in the Topkapi Palace, which is in Istanbul in Turkey. Let me just go back. That one is about 99% of the Quran, but it's dated to the mid-8th century, a good 100 years after Muhammad. What's more, it has 2,270 manuscript variants, which means these are words or phrases that are different in that Quran than what we have in the Quran today. So it's not the same Quran. It has many variants. The Samarkand is considered to be the most favorite by the Muslims. This is in Uzbekistan, in Tashkent in Uzbekistan. This one has hundreds of variants. What's more, it only goes up to chapter 43. There's 114 chapters in the Quran. It's missing most of the Quran. And what's most troubling is when you look at the Arabic in it, whoever wrote the Quran didn't know Arabic very well. It makes a grammatical mistake after grammatical mistake, so much so that the Muslim scholars today say don't even use it. It's an embarrassment. So that's the second best one they have. This one here is the Ma'il. It's like the Tashkent or the Samarkand manuscript. It only goes up to chapter 43, though there's 114 chapters. It is right here in London. That's the one you have. That's called the 2165 manuscript. It's in the Riblack Gallery. If you go to London, you can go see it in the British Library. It is about 25% of, I'm sorry, it is about 50% of the Quran. It goes up to chapter 43, as I said. But it has many manuscript variants. The problem is they haven't listed what they all are, so we don't know what that is yet. But that is dated to the early to mid-8th century. The Samarkand that I talked about earlier is dated to the early 8th century. Then you have the Petropolitanus. This is one of the earliest ones. This is dated to about 719, 720, so it's the beginning of the 8th century. It is only 19% of the Quran, and it has 93 manuscript variants. That means words or phrases that are different than the Quran we have today. There's Husseini manuscript, which is the fifth one. That is in Cairo in Egypt, and you can see it's a monumental text. You don't put that in your back pocket. And this one has covering after covering, hundreds of coverings where they're covering up the text so you can't see what's underneath. Standardizing it, we call this censorship. It has so many of these coverings that on one page it has 8 different coverings. What's left are just chicken scratches, but what's left is now agrees with the Hafs text that we use today. So they've censored it all the way through. You can probably see right there. Can you see some coverings there, right there? There's a few coverings even on that page. If you look right here, you can see a covering there, you can see a covering there, where they're covering the text. The Sanaa manuscript is the most exciting. This is the last one that was discovered in 1975 by accident. It is the oldest of all these manuscripts. It is dated to 705. However, it is a palimpsest, which means it has a lower layer underneath it. What they would do, these are all written on animal skin, and when you write them on animal skin, and if you make a mistake or you don't like what you've written, you just wash it off and write over top of it. The problem is it looks great when you do that. It looks like you have washed it off permanently, but the difficulty is hundreds of years later, the ink starts to bleed through. And when the ink starts to bleed through, you can actually see the lower layer under ultraviolet light. So you separate the two layers, and you can see that the lower layer has 63 verses underneath that are underneath the other verses that are on top. When you look at those 63 verses, there are 70 manuscript variants just within those 63 verses. The upper layer is dated to 705. The lower layer, last 2 decades of the 7th century. It's hard to know because we can't date the ink. Now here's what's interesting. Look here. Notice here, there is a text here and then there's a yellow mark. That's the end of Surah 19. Here suddenly Surah 22 begins. What happened to Surah 20 and 21? They begin over here on this page. Notice that? A totally different script. Maybe you can't see it, but there's 2 different scripts, 2 different Arabic scripts on just between those 2 pages. There's about 60 years between these 2 pages. Do you notice all those orange marks? Do you see an orange mark there? Every time you see an orange mark, that is a manuscript variant. That means a word in that manuscript that is not in our Quran today. There are over 1,000 of these manuscript variants, over 1,000 of these differences, different words in that manuscript than the Quran we have today. So let's look at a summary. None of these 6 manuscripts are from the 7th century. None of them are complete. None of them completely agree with each other. None of them completely agree with the current 1924 Hafs text. All of them have hundreds and even thousands of subsequent manuscript variants. So when was there a complete Quran? That's a question you can ask your Muslim friends. Remember 2015, they found this Quran here in Birmingham. This is called the Birmingham Folios. Did you all remember this? All over the news, we have finally found the original Quran, the oldest Quran. This is the Quran that existed while Muhammad was living. And you had Dr. David Thomas said, this writer, the writer of this manuscript could well have known the Prophet Muhammad. He would have seen him probably. He would maybe have heard him preach. He may have known him personally, and that really is quite a thought to conjure. What is he talking about? Well, in 2015, while they were, one of the researchers was going through one of the old manuscripts that they found in the Birmingham Library, they came across 2 pages. These 2 pages that were there that did not belong to the manuscript that it was inside. It had been tucked in there. These 2 pages looked very old. Why? Because there's no dots on them. You know, do you see any dots above and below the lines? You need the dots to know what the letters are. So this is before the dots were created, proving it's a very old script. What's more, there's no dhamma, fatha, or kasra. There are no vowels there. So obviously this is a very early script. So they sent it down to Oxford, to the laboratories there in Oxford, and they carbon dated them, and they carbon dated them from 568 to 645. Very inexact. But Muhammad was born in 570 and he died in 632. So this covers his whole lifespan, proving that this could be a Quran that Muhammad watched or read. But the problem is, it's only 2 pages. 2 pages do not make a Quran. A Quran has over 6,300 verses. There's only 33 verses in this. And it covers not three, but parts of 3 different surahs. 3 different chapters, chapters 18, chapters 19, and chapters 20. There you can see them right there. What's interesting is when you look at these 33 verses, those 3 chapters have over 300 verses. This is only 10% of those 3 chapters, so they're not even comprehensive. What's most interesting is when you look at what they say. In the chapter 18 portion, it's all about the 7 sleepers of Ephesus. That was written in 512 AD. So that predates Islam, does it not? It is Arabic, but that's why it was written for the Arabic people. But the story itself is a good 100 years before the Quran was written. Chapter 19, verse 91 and 98 is the story of the Proto-Evangelium of James, which comes from 145 AD. That's the 2nd century. That's 400 years before the Quran. And the story of Moses that's in chapter 20 is straight out of the Bible. That's 1400 years earlier. These 3 stories on these folios are all pre-Islamic, pre-Quranic, pre-Muhammad, which makes sense because they're written in Arabic for Arabic-speaking people. They're trying to get these stories into their hands. But this is long before the Quran was put together. So how can Muslims claim that Muhammad read this? Can you see the problem? We'll get back to that because it gets even better. Now we come to the mother lode, and this is what is causing, this is stuff you guys and gals can use. Back in 2013, my colleague Hatun Tash was in Morocco, and she went into a bookshop to get some Qurans. Wanted to get some Qurans for her students. So she ordered about 6 Qurans. She said, can you please give me 6 Qurans? And the guy behind the counter said, well, which Quran do you want? She says, what do you mean, which Quran? There's only 1 Quran. Hatun has been brought up as a Muslim. Her father was a well-known imam in Turkey, so she'd always been taught her whole life, there's only 1 Quran. That's all you heard, right? 1 Quran, 1 Quran. We have many Bibles, but there's 1 Quran. The guy says, well, over here we have Qalun, over here we have Warsh, over here we have Hafs, here we have Kisai, up over here we have Hamza. He said, hold on, stop, what are you saying? What do you mean? What are you talking about? A variety of different names. He said, well, which one do you want? Warsh or Hafs? She said, well, give me them all. So she bought them, they were only about £1 each, and she brought them back to London and showed them to me, and I started laughing. I said, Hatun, do you realize what you have here? These are known as qira'ats. These are known as ahruf. What Muslims will tell you is this, and this you can get off of Wikipedia. What I'm going to show you right here is straight off of Wikipedia. When you go up on Wikipedia, they will tell you that in 936, this guy named Ibn Mujahid, he had to choose from about 700 Qurans that were written at that time. 700 different Qurans that were written at that time. He had to choose 7. And these are the 7. Nafi, Ibn Kathir, Abu Amir, Abu Imar, Asim, Hamza, and Al-Kasai. Those are the 7. And lots of Muslims will know those 7 names. These are the creme de la creme, the best of the best of all the Qurans. What Muslims don't know is that every one of those Qurans are different. They've never opened them up to read them. She brought them back to me, and I said, yes, they're all different. Every one of them is different. That's why they have different names. But notice what's missing in that list. Those 7, this Quran is missing. This Quran, which is this Quran. This is the Arabic Hafs. This is known as the Hafs text. There it is in Arabic, right? Do you see this name up there? Hafs, H-A-F-S. It's not on that list? No. So by the 10th century, this Quran had not been chosen yet. But this is the Quran that every Muslim uses today. So in 1194, this man, his name was al-Shatibi. Al-Shatibi, in 1194, had to choose 2 students from every one of those 7. So each one of those 7, he chose 2 students, which made 14. Am I correct? 7 plus 14, now you have 21 Qurans. And what do you see there? Ooh, there he is. Hafs, right there. The other one that I want to show you is this one here. This is the second most popular Quran. This is the Warsh Quran. And where's his name? Right up there. 812. Warsh is from Cairo, Egypt. He died in 812. Hafs is from Kufa, Iraq. He died in 796. Cairo, Kufa, Egypt, Iraq. Did these 2 men know Muhammad? Look at their dates. 812, 796. Absolutely not. This guy wrote this Quran. Where's the green one? This guy wrote this Quran 140 years after Muhammad. He didn't even come from Mecca, Medina. He did not know the Qurayshi dialect. He wrote in a completely different dialect. Yet this is the Quran that is now the official Quran for the whole world. Since 1985. We'll get to that. Hutton then came back and showed me this. So I said, well, she said, well, how many more can I get? I said, there's about 30 of them. Why don't you try to find them? So she started going and sending people who are going down to Morocco or going to Jordan or going to Yemen or going to Oman. Can you get me Kasai? Can you get me Kalum? Can you get me Jafar? She just started asking for all of them. And so they all would come back with all these Quran. So that by 2016, she found not only these 21, the other 9 that were then chosen in 1429 by al-Jazari. Al-Jazari realized we still need some more, so he chose 3 more qira'at and what we call riwayats in purple, another 6 to support them. Now you have 30 different Qurans. Are you seeing that? 30 different. This is on Wikipedia. I'm not lying. 30 different Qurans. No 2 are alike. Just look at these 2 right here. If you look at these 2 right here, these 2 Qurans, there are 5,000 different words. If you have 5,000 different words, you have 5,000 different meanings. If you have 5,000 different meanings, you have 5,000 different beliefs, different practices, and yes, different theology. Can you see how devastating this is to Islam? Now, on an academic level, this is not a problem for us as academics because we know that manuscripts get changed. It's a huge problem for every Muslim on the street. Because every Muslim has been told since they were knee-high to a grasshopper that there is only one Quran and that there's not one word, not one letter has changed. Remember the 4 things I talked about at the very beginning? For 1,400 years, not one word, not one letter. And it's not they that are saying that, it's the Quran that says that. In chapter 10, verse 15, and chapter 18, verse 27, it says man cannot change God's word. In chapter 15, verse 9, it says Allah will guard his word. Not one word, not one letter will change. So it's the Quran that makes this claim. It's the Quran that makes the claim. So here you have now 30 Qurans chosen by 1429. That is 800 years after Muhammad. They finally get 30 Qurans. Guess how many differences? Go ahead.
So what does your Muslim who walks into a bookshop in Morocco and to buy a Quran think when he looks up and sees 10 different versions for sale? You know, it just seems strange that a Muslim would...
Absolutely, it seemed strange, but no one had said this publicly. No one had said this publicly. No? Okay, they would say different pronunciation, but they all mean the same thing. And that's the only answer you're going to get today. Don't worry, Mr. Smith, they all mean the same thing. Hold on. Here are the 26 that we held up at Speaker's Corner in 2016. we held up these 26 right here. The Muslims went berserk. They went absolutely berserk. They did not know what to do. When we held up these 26, and these weren't even the 30 yet complete. This is the ones she had gotten by 2016. When we were at Speaker's Corner, they tried to grab them from our hands. They threw things at us. And then this man over here, that's Muhammad Hijab, he stood outside, went outside the crowd, and he told all the Muslims, come to me, come to me. Do not listen to them. Do not watch what they're showing you, and do not listen to what they're saying. I will explain it all to you. This man is about 6'6", 6'7". He's a very tall individual. He would not allow them to see what we were showing. That was in June of 2016. Let me jump to June 8th of 2020, just 2 years ago. 2 years ago, Muhammad Hijab, who's on the left here, had a Zoom interview with this man here, Dr. Yasir Qadhi. Dr. Yasir Qadhi is considered one of the leading scholars in the Muslim world today. He lives in Houston, Texas. He got his doctorate at Yale University on the Quran, on this material, in 1995, and is known all over the world as a leader in the Quranic exposition. So he, Muhammad Hijab from London, having seen what we did in 2016, he had this interview. What he didn't know is that we were all watching it. I was watching it live. And he said to Dr. Yasir Qadhi, I'm putting out a blank sheet of paper. Which Quran are you going to write on it? Which is the one that is in heaven? Which is the one that was revealed to Muhammad? Yasir Qadhi said, do not talk about this. We do not talk about this in public. Do not ask me this question. And then he went on and said, the Ahruf Kirat is the most difficult topic for scholars in the last 1,000 years. In the last 1,000 years, no Muslim has been able to answer this question. He says, when converts come to Islam, we don't talk about this. We don't tell them about this. When they become a little bit more mature, we tell them, don't ask any questions, just memorize what we tell you. If they become more serious and they become more mature, then we do a deep dive. And he said to Muhammad Hijab, take my class, I will explain it to you. A deep dive. And then he said, Muhammad Hijab said, well, was this the crisis of knowledge that you had when you were at Yale University? God, he said, no, not a crisis of knowledge, a crisis of faith. He said, no, not a crisis of faith, a crisis of knowledge is what he said. And he said, we in the West, we in the East, we Muslims, we have a respect for our Quran. And we put a red line, and we don't go beyond that red line. Certain questions we don't ask of the Quran. But when I was at Yale University, there are no red lines. You can ask any question you want at Yale University, and the same with any Western university. And he said for the last 25 years, so that's talking from Yale University from 1995 up until 2020, for the last 25 years, I have never talked about this problem. You will not see one lecture on it. But take my class. He said the Westerners here in the West, the authorities here in the West, they have gone leaps and bounds in the last 100 years. And they're looking at us Muslims like the emperor with no clothes. What an admission. Then he turned to Muhammad Hijab. And he said, Muhammad Hijab, you represent the East. I represent the West. I represent Western academia. But you just represent 99% of all Muslims here in the East. You Muslims in the East, your narrative has holes in it. Have you heard this phrase? Your narrative, the standard Islamic narrative. He said the standard narrative, that's why we use that phrase, standard Islamic narrative, has holes in it. Boy, we started clapping. Finally, after 28 minutes, Muhammad Hijab put his hand out again, a second time. He said, I'm still waiting. Which Quran are you going to write? Is it going to be Hafs? Is it Warsh? Is it Qalun? Yasir Qadhi had to give an answer. At the very end, he finally says, they're all the Quran. A little bit of Hafs, a little bit of Warsh, a little bit of Qalun, a little bit of Kisai, a little bit of Nafi. You just mix them all up and that's the Quran. And I started clapping. See, what he didn't realize is what we know. There are 93,000 differences between these 30 Qurans. 93,000 differences. That means 93,000 different theologies, different precepts, different beliefs, different practices, and he had not even bothered to look at one of them. Why? Because we don't talk about this in public. Take the camera off me, he said. Now, because of that was being recorded live and went up on both of their sites within 2 weeks. The comments, I was reading the comments, so many Muslims were leaving Islam. Hundreds of Muslims were leaving Islam. And they were all blaming Yasir Qadhi, and they were all blaming Muhammad Hijab. And they said, our blood will be on your shoulders on Judgment Day. We are no longer Muslims because of what you said. Within 2 months, they had to, first of all, after 2 weeks, they had to shut down the comments because their comments were so strong, so hateful. Within 2 months, they deleted that video off of both their sites. They have almost 250,000 to 500,000 followers on their sites who are watching this. But folks, they've deleted it off their sites, but I've got it on mine. Hatun has it on hers. David Wood has it on his. We have retained it. So every June 20th, we just did it 2 months ago, every June 20th, I resurrect it and do another video just on it to remind the whole world how much damage Yasir Qadhi did to the Quran. Can you see how this damages everything? Because this shuts down eternality. This shuts down any reference to Muhammad having any reference to it. It shuts down any knowledge that God has protected it and proves that man has manipulated, changed it. More than that, has changed it thousands of times. And that's why no longer can they say the Quran has been preserved. Not one word, not one letter. Then we have Dr. Dan Brubaker. Dr. Dan Brubaker works with me. He's part of my MAPI program. He teaches the Quran on our MAPI course. And then when he did his doctoral thesis back in 2014, he started going around to all the manuscripts around the world, the ones you saw that I showed you, the Topkapi, the Samarkand, the Ma'il, the Petropolis, the Husseini, and the Sana manuscript. He went around to all these manuscripts and filmed and took pictures of all of them. The first to do that. He had to go to all the museums, get permission, and film them and photograph them. And what he was looking for were just changes to the consonantal text. Now, those manuscripts, as you saw, don't have any dots above them. You notice that? They don't have any vowels. So these are consonantal texts only. That means they only have consonants. As a result of that, if there's any change on any of them, it changes the entire word. All right? So this is this is before the qira'ats were introduced, before the dots and the vowels were introduced. So he started photographing them, and he came up with 800 by 2014 when he wrote his doctorate. Now he's come up with 4,000. 4,000 what? He's looking at insertions, at erasers, at coverings, and tapings. So there you can see some insertion. Can you see there's an insertion there? There's another word that's put above the line. Can you see here? There's another word that's put above the line. Anytime you see a word that's put above the line, they're inserting it at a later date. They're putting that word there. Why are they putting that word there? Because now it corresponds with the Hafs text, the text we use today. Here you can see erasers. Can you see they erased it there? They erased 2 letters there. There they erased a letter there. There they're erasing an aleph there. Whenever you erase it, what's left behind now corresponds with the text we have today. Here they're erasing it, but they're writing over top of it. So there they've erased one word and they've written another word in a completely different script. Here they've erased it, but they put another word in a completely different color, in the red color. And here you can see it's very clear that they've erased it. There you can see it has a lot of alifs and lams, and they just put kul, say, just 2 letters, proving that and elongate the letters so it can accommodate the text. What's left behind now supports what we have in the Quran today. Or they overwrite what they've erased. You can see the underneath, but they overwritten over top, or they've written over top here. Here you can see an entire line has been written over a top. Can you see that? 2 complete lines, and they've written over top a completely 2 different sentences. And what they have written over top now corresponds with the Hafs text. And here's the coverings that I was telling you about. These are from the Husseini test. Can you see a cover there? Can you see a cover there? Look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 coverings in just 1 page. So much so it just looked like chicken scratches when you get through. Here you can see there's a covering there. Here's a covering here. Here's a covering there. There's a covering there. Every time you cover it, you're censoring the text. You don't want the person to read what's underneath. What's left behind when you read it now corresponds exactly with the Hafs text that was chosen in 1924. And here you have selective coverings overwritten. So they've covered this one here. There's a whole covering. And then they've written over top in a completely different text. Here you can see where they've covered it and written 2 words. Kalu. Here you can see where they've covered it and written nothing. And then they've covered it and written nothing. But here they've covered it and written totally different text. There they've covered it in half of it is written, half of it's not written. So they're doing a lot of manipulation here. Here is what they call a taping. But when you look at the taping, I can't see this now. When you look at the taping there, can you see the taping there? Dan said, well, there must be because it's damaged. But we look at the back, there's no damage whatsoever. They're taping over top of it to censor the text. So we wanted to go back and we wanted to find out about this. 4,000 of these. So we wanted to introduce this book because this just came out in 2019. Have any of you seen this book? These are just 22 of those corrections. 22 that you can see here. And he decided to write and publish in 2019. Well, we wanted to take it down to Speaker's Corner, so Hatun and I got up on the ladder, as you can see us there, to introduce this book in June of 2019. It had just been published 2 hours before we got up on the ladder. As we got up on the ladder, this guy came and joined us. That's Mansour Ahmad. Mansour Ahmad is probably the leading authority on the manuscript evidence. He lives here in London, but he does his work in Cambridge on the Islamic Awareness website. He has he's in charge of all the manuscripts, which is the largest number of manuscripts anywhere in the world. It's by far the best website for that. So he got up on the ladder to try to confront us. And he made this claim, Mr. Smith, we can trace a contextual tradition of the Quran all the way back to Uthman. That means we can follow the Quran all the way back to Uthman 652. I immediately turned on him. You can see the video. I was going to put it today, but we're running out of time, so I couldn't show the video. But I immediately turn on him and I say, okay, what text are you talking about? What manuscript are you referring to? There is no Uthmanic manuscript. So he said, all right. I said, what about the 7th century? Can you show me a text that goes back to the 7th century? He still wouldn't respond. So I said, well, what are you referring to? He said, within the 1st century of Islam, we can find a manuscript. I said, the 1st century goes up to 719, 622 to 719. Can you show me a manuscript up to 719? And he said, we have 97% of the Quran by 719. Well, I wanted to find out what he's talking about. After half an hour, he finally had to get off. I went up on his website, and this is what you find. This is the 97% of the Quran. It's actually 96% of the Quran. And take a look what they are. Those are fragments. 63 fragments. A little bit of this, a little bit of that, all the way up to the Ma'il, which is the 2165 at the very top. That's about 50% of the Quran. In order to get 97% of the Quran, they've got to piecemeal fragments from all over the world to try to get that 97%. They claim every one of those is before 719. Well, they didn't know that we're going to hold them to account. So we've gone back. Our team has gone back and looked at every one of those fragments, all 63 of them. 20 of them are tentatively dated. Those are the ones you see going up right now. That means people have looked at them, but nobody's come up with any conclusion. So they should never have placed those before 719 because nobody has concluded that what they say. 9 of them, look at the ones in blue. 9 of them are all been dated after 719. They're mid-8th to late 8th century, including the biggest one, which is the Ma'il one, which is the one up here. So strike those out. And what about the remaining 34? Well, the remaining 34, no one's done any work on. Why were they even using them? No one has done any research on those 34 fragments. Can you see what's going on here? Which means they grabbed a little bit of here, they grabbed a little here because they needed this surah, they needed that ayah, they needed that ayah. They just put them together and threw it up there thinking no one would track them down, no one would follow up on them. We followed up on them and we have shut them down completely. What means that none of them are really valid, since all of them are either later or tentatively dated or have no supporting evidence whatsoever. There are no complete Qurans for the first 100 years of Muhammad. We now shut that down. The Muslims have had to collect 63 fragments of the Quran to find 96% by 719, yet almost all of them are tentative or have no supporting evidence for early dates. Some of their dates even go to the 9th and 10th century. They have not studied any of them to know if any of them agree with the Hafs text that we have today. So how did we get this Quran? How did we get this Hafs text that I keep talking about? You want to know, don't you? Well, it all had to do with Cairo. Remember I showed you the graph with 30 different Qurans, and you had 7 by Ibn Mujahid. You had another 14 put up by al-Shatibi in 1194, and then you had another 9 that were added in 1429 by al-Jazari, right? So Ibn Mujahid, Shatibi, and al-Jazari, 936, 1194, 1429. Then you get 30, right? Well, here's the problem. You're in Cairo and you have high school students coming to do tests on the Quran. And every one of your students is writing different answers. Why? Because they have memorized their Quran by their family Quran. And their family Quran is either the Warsh or it's the Hafs or it's the Qalun. And every one of them comes from different part of the world. And all of their Qurans disagree, which means all their answers disagree. And you've got a dilemma. How do you have standardized tests for high school students if all 30 Qurans are being used for their answers? It caused such a crisis that finally the education authority went to Al-Azhar University, which is the world's best university for Islam, went to a man named Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Haddad, and they asked him to choose just one of those 30, just one. And he chose the Hafs text. Why did he choose the Hafs text? Because that is the text that the Ottomans had chosen. The Ottoman Empire had chosen the Hafs text because they liked Kufa, they liked Hafs, because his was the easiest to read. So that's why they chose his text. What did they do with the other 29 that disagreed? They took them out into a boat and threw them into the Nile. I kid you not, thinking that that would get rid of the problem for them. Well, it did get rid of the problem for those students in the high school there. So that became the official text for all of the high schools in Cairo. That became so successful that by 1936, the Egyptian government decided to make the Hafs text the universal text for all of Egypt, for the country of Egypt. And they call it the Farouk edition because King Farouk came to power that year. Now suddenly everybody in Egypt now had one Quran. They all have standardized tests for the whole country. The Arabs, meanwhile, were watching what was happening in Egypt, and in 1985, King Fahd, who was the king at that time, liked what was happening in Egypt, so he decided to make the Hafs text the universal text for the whole Muslim world in 1985. How many people here were alive in 1985? Just raise your hands. All of you who are raising your hands. Jonathan, you weren't alive in 1985? Ooh, you're really young. All the people here, except for Jonathan, are older than the Quran. How does that make you feel? John, you're pretty young. That makes me feel pretty old. That means this text has now become the universal text for the entire world in your lifetime. But nobody knew that the other texts were any different. They did in Egypt, they did in Cairo, they did certainly in Saudi Arabia, but they did not know it until we showed it for the whole world. Now we're going to end with this, and this is the best one. This is what I'm going to end with. This is the new stuff. Before I do that, I need to understand what's going on. In the 7th century, remember what I told you earlier. Everybody was Christian. There was no Islam, there was no Muslims, there was no Quran, there was no Muhammad, there was no Mecca. The 5 things you need to make Islam, none of them existed in the 7th century. We can't find any reference. But there were lots of Christians, but they were in the eastern part of the empire. And the Byzantines were in the western part of the empire, and Heraclius was the emperor who in 622 destroyed the Sassanids, which freed up the eastern part for the Arabs, gave the Arabs their freedom. But the Arabs were under the hegemony and under the persecution of the Sassanids for centuries. They were so happy that Heraclius did this. But Heraclius did not stay around. He needed to go west because he was having problem with the Visigoths and he was having problem with the Spanish. So he did not care about the east. He let the east pretty much come to their own conclusion, and he let the bishops in each one of the major cities like Damascus and Iraq and Petra to come up with their own control, and in Jerusalem to control their populaces. So the bishops were in the cities. They were in the major cities. They all spoke Aramaic. Christianity at that time was all Aramaic in the east. The Aramaic Christianity, however, was very much of an aristocracy. So all the theological seminaries and the colleges and the Bible schools were all in Aramaic. The people who were on the streets spoke Arabic. Arabic did not have a text, did not have a script. It was only a spoken language. Aramaic did have a script, did have a text. So those in the cities were all speaking Aramaic. Those on the ground were speaking Arabic. They didn't have a script. They were all Ishmaelites from Hagar's line. And they call themselves Ishmaelites, and they call themselves Hagarenes. That's the name they gave themselves. Well known. Look at the 7th century. They had no one to fight for them and no one to really work with them until al-Malik comes to power in 680. Al-Malik is Ishmaelite. He is from Merv, way up in Turkmenistan. He is from the Marwan family. And he comes to power in 685. He is the caliph up in Damascus, and what does he do? He decides to make Arabic the lingua franca for the whole empire. Now, he is the one that controls from Tripoli to Afghanistan, all that land. So he makes Arabic an international empire language. The problem is, he is an Ishmaelite from the line of Ishmael. The Ishmaelites don't have a prophetic line. Christians and Jews have a prophetic line, don't they? We know what the prophetic line in the Christians and Jews. The Ishmaelites don't have a scripture. The Christians and Jews do have a scripture. So what does he need? He needs to create that identity. In order to create that identity, he needs to do something big. So what does he do? Slam! He puts the Dome of the Rock right there in Jerusalem. You've seen it. It's amazing. It's a huge building, the largest building of its day. He puts it, slaps it right there in Jerusalem to make a statement to the whole world, we are now the new men on the block. But we do not believe in the Trinity. We do not believe in Jesus' divinity. And he writes it on the inscriptions. And he places it on the building looking down on the Church of the Sepulchre, which are the Trinitarians. Now that he's done that, he writes it in Arabic, not in Aramaic. The inscriptions are all in Arabic. But there are no dots on them. There are no vowels. So now that you have said that, you now need to create a scripture. And what do? You need to borrow, because there is no scripture for the Aramaics, for the Ishmaelites, or the Ishmaelites and the Hagarenes don't have any of their own scripture. So what do? You borrow. But who do you borrow from? Well, take a look at the Quran. You notice the Quran doesn't begin or end, its stories don't begin or end. Have you noticed that? That they're all over the place. There's no sequence. There's no chronology. It jumps from story to story. One doesn't end, one doesn't begin. Have you noticed there's only one complete story in the entire Quran, and that's in chapter 12, the story of Joseph. So you start to borrow all these stories from the Jewish apocryphal account. You don't go to the Bible, because the Bible has not yet been translated into Arabic. The Bible is still in Hebrew. You go to the New Testament, the problem is the New Testament is all in Aramaic, and you don't understand the New Testament. It's the Diatessaron, and you don't read the Diatessaron, so you've got to go somewhere. So they go to the Gnostic writings. Why? Because the Gnostic writings were written in Arabic, and all the Jewish apocryphal accounts were written in Arabic. So you grab those stories that you can read, and you slap them into your Quran. But then you realize, hold on a minute, you want an awful lot of other material, so you start borrowing from the Christians what you can. The problem is you can't read the Aramaic. So you take the dots from the Aramaic off, you take the vowels out of the Aramaic, and you introduce your own dots, and you introduce your own vowels. And you put one dot above the letter and it makes a na. Two dots above the letter makes it a ta. Three dots above the letter makes it a tha. One dot below the letter makes it a ba. Two dots below the letter makes it a ya. Na, ta, tha, ba, ya. A little smiley face, you have 5 different letters. All right? On top of that, you also need dialectical difference. That means you need to create 3 vowels. So you put a dhamma, which is a little curly Q, and that makes it a u sound. And you put a slash, and that makes a fatha, which makes a ah sound. And you put a slash below, and that's the kasra, which makes an e sound. So now you have a u, ah, and e, 3 vowels. Suddenly, you can now create your own words. So you give her, and this is Hafs over here, this is Nafi. You give Nafi, and you're supposed to be a male, but he decides to write his own Quran, and he puts his dots where he wants to. And then you decide to write your own Quran, and you live in Kufa, and you live in Damascus, and you write your own Quran, and your name is Warsh. And so you put your dots where you want to. And then you also live in Kufa, and you don't agree with him, so you put your own Quran, and you call yourself Al-Kasai. And then over here, you create a Quran, and you're living in Basra, so you write your own Quran, and you call yourself Al-Kalun. And then you can see, so there's suddenly all these Qurans start to proliferate in these 5 cities. None of them are alike, and no one's reading each other's Quran, because you're putting your dots where you want to. But as you put your dots where you want to, you don't know what the text is saying. And so you kind of say, well, whenever there's a name Jesus there, you take Jesus out, and you put Rasul, or you put Nabi, the prophet. The prophet. Not Jesus, you put the prophet. Right? You see what's going on? But by the 10th century, there are 700s of these different Qurans. All of you have Qurans, and every one of you have put your name to your Qurans. You have dots and vowels all over the place. Suddenly, there's such a proliferation, there's a crisis. There's a dilemma. That's why the caliph goes to Ibn Mujahid and says, you've got to choose 7. So he chooses 7. But how does he choose 7? He doesn't read yours, and he doesn't read yours, he doesn't read yours. He looks to see how many students you have. And if you have 7 students, oh, that's good, we'll use your Quran. And if you have 8 students, oh, that's good. But if you only have 2, we're not going to use your Quran because you don't have enough. He goes and sees how many of these students, how many students they have. Basically, it was a popularity contest. It had nothing to do with textual criticism. Now, who has done textual criticism of the Bible here? Anybody? How do you do textual criticism of the Bible? You open the book. You read the text. You compare that text. If you've given the Sinaiticus, when the Sinaiticus was discovered by Tischendorf, what did he do? He read the text and he compared it with the text that they had. And if there was any disagreement, he threw it away. Right? That's called textual criticism. Is that what they did with any of these Qurans? They didn't read one word. They weren't interested in reading one word. They were just interested in popularity. Can you see what's going on here, folks? So, the Germans decided to do something. This guy here, Dr. Gunther Lüning, back in 1970, Gunther Lüning was doing a doctoral thesis in Germany. And he wanted to look at the Quran, and he was an Arabist, so he knew Arabic fluently. He also knew Aramaic. And as he was looking at the beautiful poetry in the Quran, which is there, he noticed that when he looked at the poetry, he thought he knew he'd recognized this before. So he went back to his Aramaic text, and he noticed that every one of these pieces of poetry could be found in previous Christian Aramaic writings. So he wrote it up in his doctoral thesis. He got excellent opus, which is the highest grade you can get in Germany for a doctoral thesis. It is so high that if you get this grade, you are given an automatic professorship anywhere in Germany. Yet they didn't give him a professorship. In 1972, they threw him out of the university, threw him into obscurity, and for 30 years he lived on welfare with his wife. Nothing was done about his doctorate. In 1999, or around that time, I went to Germany to visit Dr. Gerhard Puin. And Dr. Gerhard Puin wanted me to introduce me to this guy. So I went to see him, and we were talking. He talked about his doctoral thesis. I said, well, where is it? He said, well, I have it right here. I said, have you translated it to English? He said, yeah, I've done my own translation. I opened it up, and the very first sentence had 400 words. 400 words per sentence. By the time I finished the sentence, I can't remember what I'd started with. It was that difficult. That's how Germans write. I said, we've got to dumb this down, so we've got to put it in layman's terminology. Can I take it back to London? So I brought it back to London, had it translated in London so that people could read it, sent it back to him. He then wanted to get it published, and I completely lost contact with him because everything else happened after 9/11. You all know what happened in 9/11, so I lost contact. I was more interested in that. What had happened was, he sent it to India to get published. It went all over the world, and this is the book right here, A Challenge to Islam for Reformation. Please don't read that title. That's a terrible title. You need to read what's under it. I can't even read it. Can you read it there on your screen? What's there in the small print? Can you read what's there? It's a reinformation. Well, basically what it says is a reconstruction of the original language in the Aramaic text to find hymns, Christian hymns written in the text, is what he did. Is that what it says?
The rediscovery and reliable reconstruction of a comprehensive pre-Islamic Christian hymn or hymns in the Quran and the various Islamic reconstructions.
There it is. It's basically what he's saying, and that should be the title, but it's, again, being German, it's too long to be a title. But that is really what the whole book's about. That spread right across the world. He was resurrected. He was given his accolades. He died in 2014, a happy man, because of that English translation. Now, Dr. Christoph Luxemburg, who is also a German scholar, seeing what had happened with Gunther Lüning's book, decided to do the same thing. He is an Arabist, and he's also an Aramaist. And so he decided to take the dark passages. These are the passages that nobody understands. Even the scholars don't understand. About 25% of the Quran you cannot understand. I can't understand it. Nobody can. So he decided to apply what Gunther Lüning did, but much more sophisticated. He did 7 different layers. He first looked at the 10th century tafsir and looked to see if he could find reference to it. He then went to the Lisan al-Arab, which is the Arabic dictionary written in the 13th century. He then looked for homonyms, so these are synonyms of roots in the Aramaic. And then he looked at the diacritics, but he took off the diacritical marks and put the new diacritical marks on, taking off the old ones and putting the Aramaic. And then he went to look for Aramaic words. They have to go to a function. They said that they'd be leaving early. And then he tried to find the lost meaning, and guess what he did? By going through these 7 steps of just peeling away, he finally found what these spark passages, every one of them came to light. And guess what they were? Once he took the Arabic Quran back to its Aramaic root, all the dark passages were Christian lectionaries, Christian homilies, and Christian hymns, all about Jesus Christ. They're all about Jesus, folks. Which means it's not what he found, it's who he found. Now here's the book right here. It just came out in 2000. This is now going down as a storm all over the Muslim world. We're using it. You need to get it. If any of you can grab it before it gets out of print, grab this book. It's called The Syro-Aramaic Reading of the Quran. This is basically destroying the Quran and showing that all these borrowed passages are all about Jesus. Let me give you some example, and we'll end with this. Oh, I see right here. No, you won't. Sorry, I thought I had it. I guess I don't. There it is. Chapter 23. If you look at chapter 23, it's a beautiful prayer by Ephraim, Saint Ephraim in the 4th century, right? And it's a prayer about what the believers are to do. The believers, they are to pray, they are to pay their zakat, their tithe, they're not to use foul language, and they're to remain chaste. That's verse 5. They are to remain chaste. Verse 6 suddenly talks about how that they are to have as many wives as they want and that which their right hand possesses. That means in many female slaves of war. It absolutely bastardized verses 5 about chastity. This is not what Ephraim meant about chastity. So the Arabs, the Muslims, have added verse 6 and 7 at a later date, completely adulterating the text. Then verse 8 to 11 talks about the pledge, guards the prayer, and those who guard their prayer and do these things that they said earlier, they will be in paradise. A beautiful hymn about paradise. What's more, if you take verse 1 to 5 and verse 8 through 11 and throw out verse 6 and 7, there's a memnonic all the way through. It's basically, if you look at the Aramaic, it fits the Aramaic. They have the same, the ending of every word is the same, so people can memorize it that easily. This is straight out of St. Ephraim. Beautiful prayer about the believers and their reward in heaven. And it absolutely adulterates it with these 2 verses. This is what the Quran, this is what the Muslims have done all the way through the Quran. Which means we need to take it back to its Aramaic roots. Let me summarize the 3 periods of textual evolution. In the 7th century, you have the Aramaic texts of the Arabic. In the 8th to 9th century, you have the Arabic manuscripts which are introduced. In the 8th to 10th century, you have the Qira'at and the Ahruf diacritics which are introduced. Can you see what was going on? This was Arabizing the text, bastardizing it, taking the name of Jesus out, so that the text we have today is a Christian heresy, all against Jesus Christ. But we need to get it back to its Aramaic roots. By getting it back to its Aramaic roots, what do we can do? We can take them back to Jesus. What's more, who do you think knows Aramaic today? I don't know of one Muslim that knows Aramaic. All the Aramaic speakers are living in Syria. They're all Christians. It's the Christians, it's our responsibility to get this back to its original text. And finally, notice what we have done. What we have researched and found, we can say that the Quran was not created by God at all. The Quran was not sent down to Muhammad between 610 and 632. The Quran was not completed by Uthman in 652. The Quran was changed in the last 1,300 years. Notice I'm saying 13, not 1,400 years, because there was no Quran in the 7th century. The Quran was finally compiled in 1924 and made official in 1985. Thus, the Quran is a mere 96, no wait, it's actually, that's wrong. That should be 37 years old, not 35. Consequently, many of us in this room are actually older than the Quran. Because we've run out of time now, I won't go to all the conclusions. But can you see what we have done to both Mecca, Muhammad, and the Quran? In every case, we've looked at evidence from the 7th century. I have not wasted my time on the 8th, 9th, and 10th century. I only wanted the 7th century. A little bit of the 8th because you have to do that with the Qurans. But everything we're finding from the century this man lived, or the century this book was put together, or the century this place existed, is proving to be fraudulent. There is no Mecca, there was no Muhammad, and there certainly was no Quran. If you can prove any one of these three is at fault, you will destroy Islam. We have proved all three are at fault. Now, this is devastating for Muslims. Hatun Tash uses this material, except for Mecca. She uses the material, and she's brought 1,000 Muslims to Jesus Christ in just the last 3 years, mainly using all this material on the Qira'at in the Ahruf. That's how damaging this is. We're getting many people, I can't say the number, who are leaving Islam and becoming Christians because of this material. Let me just give you one, and I'll end with this example. There was a lady who was a student of one of my students in MAPI course had a friendship with a lady who was getting her law degree in Houston, Texas. Her mother was a Pakistani, her father was Iranian. So she'd grown up as a Muslim all her life. Strong Muslim family. She was a strong Muslim as well. And she was engaging with my student back and forth, back and forth. Finally, my student said, well, why don't you watch this one video by a guy named Jay Smith, who did this video at KT, Kensington Temple, back in 2019. Similar to what I just done today, but not nearly as good material as I use today. She didn't want to watch it. She didn't want to watch it. So finally, she decided that she would watch it. So she went out to her car so her parents wouldn't see what she was looking at. And she put on her phone. And in her car, she watched this 45-minute video, just 45 minutes long. And then she came and she wanted to talk to our class. So I let her come in, and she was talking to our students, who had asked the question, how can you use this? She says, let me show you how you can use it. She said, I watched that video. She says, within 45 minutes, I had left Islam. She said, what Jay had done in those 45 minutes would destroy 1,400 years of history. There's no way I could go back to Islam after I saw that video. That's how devastating this material is, she said. It's not devastating to you sitting here, or you Christians, because we don't know the claims that Islam makes. She said, this kind of material takes out the foundations of the history of Islam, the foundations of Muhammad, the foundations of the Quran. Everything I've known is taken out. She still hadn't become a Christian yet. The student then brought her back to Jesus Christ, and now she is now in Bible school, and she's finished her law degree. But this kind of material, because it's so visual, you can use it. What's more, you're not going to be called hate preachers with this guy. I have yet to be stricken off. I don't get strikes at all on my YouTube channel. Because notice I've said nothing hateful today. Nothing about Muhammad's proclivities, nothing about his sexuality, nothing about the violence of Islam. I haven't talked about it. You don't need to. This is not only neutral, it's politically correct. It's not only politically correct, it's the best thing for us to use because we understand just how powerful historical criticism is because of the fact that it's been applied to our own Bible. And we have been able to use it to not only answer the questions about our Bible, but to show how strong and authoritative and credible our Bible is. So I would encourage you to use it when you can. Today is mainly for you to see, to also realize that we are winning this battle. We're no longer having to defend. We're now going on the offense. And this kind of material, when you use it offensively, it shuts down Islam in all major areas. Yes, your question.
Video, Jay, the video, the 45-minute video.
Oh, it's up on Fander Films. You can see it. It's KT from 2 years ago, from 3 years ago now. It's just Jay Smith at KT, historical evidence at KT.
Yeah.
Yeah, on YouTube. On my Fander, do you know my YouTube channel, Fander Films? PF, if you have, it's right here on our prayer card. If you get our prayer card, there it is right there. And my email's here. If you want that video, just ask me. Actually, what I've done today is much more powerful than what I did at KT. Because at KT, I didn't have near the kind of evidence I have today. And the good thing is, folks, we're getting more and more evidence all the time. This evidence is just accumulating almost every week. There's a whole new slew of evidence coming out of Germany. And that I am tabulating with Dr. Robert Kerr, the head of the INADA group, who is a professor at Brussels University, where he is using, and he says he is coming every Tuesday at night. We get together for about 3 hours and we go through all the new stuff. So, any other questions you have? We've gone past 5 o'clock, I'm sorry. But you've all kept awake. Look at that. Well done in the heat of the day. Thank you for doing that. Okay. Thank you. God bless you. Let's end with prayer. Our Heavenly Father, it's so good that we can meet together and talk about something that in some ways, this is the first time we've been able to talk about it. In the past, we've always been fearful or scared to confront Islam or to criticize it, and yet this kind of criticism is not confrontational in that it's not desultorious or bring about any anger. It will not cause people to think of us as hate preachers or Islamophobic. This material, Lord, has all been applied to you. You were asked this question. We were asked this question about your existence, about your book, your gospel, and your questions have all been answered. So, Lord, as we leave today and as we use this material as best we can, maybe showing people different videos, maybe even being able to learn some of this material, we ask, Lord, that you'll use it to your benefit, that you'll use it for your kingdom. We want to see not just tens or twenties. We want to see thousands, yea, millions of Muslims come to Christ, come home to you. A better book, a better man, and a better place. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.